I've often heard the argument that cartoons are just for kids. Like, there's always that one guy in context who says, "Hey man, cartoons are just for kids." Well, that argument has existed since the beginning of time. It's really not all that true. There isn't movement of saying that cartoons are just for kids. But even nowadays, I don't really blame people when sometimes cartoons look like they're made specifically for kids who don't know any better. I mean, it would be great to get some really great unique films. And the idea that cartoons are just for kids is absolute bullcrap when you think about it. It's absolute nonsense. I mean, it would be great to get some really great adult-oriented anime features, but even nowadays, it would be incredibly rare and most times get overshadowed by, well, crap. But, while everyone knowing, there is one person who is the master of adult animation. A person who came out of the 70s, and instead of doing what everyone else had told him, he decided to go his own way. A person who forever changed the landscape of animation. And that person is known as Ralph Bakshi. And today, we're going to get through his story and his rise and fall. Before we start this episode off, I want to warn you all. This episode contains a lot of violence, strong social issues, swearing, war, and lots of sex. Viewer discretion is advised, and if you are under the age of 14, you should probably either have a parent to watch this or be very, very careful how you watch this. Just as they say on TV, viewer discretion is highly advised. With all that being said, I'm going to Harlem 25, which is the podcast presents Down the Anime Rabbit Hole, and this is the rise and fall of Ralph Bakshi.
Goodbye, Dinah. Goodbye.
Things are gonna get crazy.
Most everyone's mad.
Our story begins in a small New York neighborhood known as Brownsville. Born on October 29, 1938, Ralph Bakshi was originally born in Haifa, Palestine, before his family moved in 1939 to escape the Nazis in World War II. His family moved to a small urban neighborhood called Brownsville. Brownsville was a unique neighborhood, to say the least, and that's playing very nicely, by the way. Any minority race you could find there that was basically just, you could find them there. Jews, African Americans, Italians, Irish, they're well into Brownsville. Sure, they don't have a lot of money, but they also have a way less bigotry than others. So it was a place where people are people, and that's why. Yeah. When Ralph was about 15 years old, he found his book, The Complete Garden Cartooning by Gene Burns, and studied all around to make sure he get all the working done. As a high school student, though, Ralph was a bit more rebellious. While attending Thomas Jefferson High School, he took very little interest in the academics and more focused on the boards, mouthing off and doodling. Okay? As you can imagine, the principal was not a fan of his antics at times. In one incident, after participating in a food fight, which is unclear if Bakshi started the food fight or if he was just a member of it, but either way he wanted, and also being caught by basically holding back the door after smoking a cigarette, Ralph was sent to the principal's office. Believing that Ralph was not the correct kind of student for him, he sent him to the Manhattan School of Industrial Art. Ralph was taught by Charles Allen. After he graduated in 1966, a buddy of his named Cosmo Angelotti got him to work at a cartoon studio called Terrytoons, working on cells of some of the most popular characters. You know the ones like Heckle and Jekyll, Sad Cat, Mighty Mouse. Ralph did make a show called My Heroes in 1968. And anything else? Okay, you guys remember this meme, right?
Somebody touch my spaghetti!
Yeah, that's Teddy Tunes. Ralph obviously did not make that, but his main gig was at the first studio meet that. Anyways, Ralph would eventually continue to work up that corporate ladder until he became a director. However, let's look at Teddy Tunes wasn't exactly the longest job. Even then, he didn't really get the whole experience of being directors. To quote Ralph in his time being Teddy Tunes director, he said this: "We didn't really direct like you think. We were animation directors because the story department controlled the storyboards. We couldn't affect anything. But I still tried. I'd retime, I'd mix up soundtracks, I'd fuck up with it, so it couldn't come up being my own." Other animation studios were also selling stuff to televisions, so CBS, so it was mainly being sold to CBS. Yes. After about 1966, Ralph left the job and moved over to Paramount Studios to replace Seamus Colhane, because Seamus was fired. The job didn't last a year because Paramount had to close down the animation studio in 1967, and it was only made to make 4 shorts while he was there. Not long afterwards, he would help introduce by employer Steve Krantz on the Canadian science fiction series Rocket Robin Hood, which ended up going about even almost as bad as Paramount, even if not worse. How can it go back to worse? Well, to put it lightly, let's just say that the producers were having a nasty lawsuit and Bakshi was almost arrested for helping Krantz. So, after all this, he decided to open his own studio, Bakshi Productions, where not only would he work on series like Rocket Robin Hood, but also the 1967 Spider-Man series. By then, he wanted to make more. He wanted to make his own movie. So he developed a script for a movie about the inner city life. However, Krantz told Bakshi that no Hollywood studio would be pick up a concept because Bakshi had no film experience. So instead, he decided to go with an adaptation of a comic strip called Fritz The Cat. Set in the 1960s, mainly 1969 and 1970, a pot-smoking, rap-punking, sex-crazed cat decides to quit studies in college and decides to live his life, her life. Meanwhile there, this cat, now known as Fritz, tries to get into some revolutionary moments, meet up with some Hells Angels people, and more, in order to discover himself. Now, before we go under, you might be wondering, who in the hell is Fritz the Cat? Well, believe it or not, he was a comic strip character, created by a guy named Robert Crumb, who he saw a house cat named Fred in Help magazine. However, he eventually grew into the horny cat that we all know of nowadays. Meanwhile, Bakshi was walking around the New York area and was looking for comics that could eat the representation. After seeing some comics, he decided to eventually grab into Krantz, which is character, to help use the place and St. Luke's place. So he went over to fly to San Francisco to try and get Krantz's approval. Unfortunately, Krantz is not exactly known for getting approval for anything. In fact, he was actually very much against the idea of this movie. Fritz the Cat was initially sold up trying to get Krantz as a pitch, and while he was able to imitate him by having the job to get through there, Krantz is known to be himself is known to be a very slick hustler and a bit of a con artist too. So eventually, he actually did get a sign work with his wife, but still he wanted to. Admittedly, Bakshi was a bit more nervous trying to get a film being made of Fritz the Cat because it starred animals, as he wanted to star more humans in the film. But he did make a compromise. For every time the animals did appear, they would actually act more like humans and less like animals at times.
Duke, you saved my life, man.
Shit.
One of the hardest things to get this film was actually a distributor, because, you know, who wouldn't want to fund a film that's not made by Disney that has nothing but uncensored swearing, sex, and violence? They literally went to every studio they could think of, and they all turned them down. Oh, and by the way, I am not exaggerating either. That wasn't until Warner Brothers did show some interest in it. So, Ralph decided to animate the entire Harlem Shuffle scene as a test, thinking that it could go well with the others. The result was that the producers were left a little shocked and a tad miffed, to put it lightly. How they also asked to tone down the sex scenes, and also to use real big name actors, which often no to both, and eventually lost signing with Warner Bros. So instead, another studio helped out afterwards, Cinemation Industries, who were known for making exploitation films like Sweetback's Badass Song as a prime example, along with getting some help from Suzanne's and Fancy Records. One film that this film has that's very well known is that it has a shockingly low budget of around less than $1 million, with some reports saying it goes below $700,000. And Bakshi had many ways of cutting down those costs. He had background actors actually play on the streets when he would actually grow up with many different looks. Not only that, but he would also later on also not use pencil tests. It didn't really know how the animation would look. It would not work. So it had very much different stuff. Meanwhile, on the animation side, some of the animators were from the original studios, but he did admit that not every studio was willing to stay on due to its these unique, mature tone. However, who did would be made me happy. Animators like Ira took sketched the background to help out using all different watercolors to make things out. Other animators came from Warner Brothers, including Ron Scribner, Manuel Perez, M. Rojas, and Ted Boxon, who spent night and day on work. Even Boxon had leukemia. Unfortunately, Boxon passed away in 1922, and his final scene would be the synagogue scene. After testing all this stuff, the Motion Picture Association of America, aka the MPAA, gave the film an X rating with a gratuitous amount of sex and violence, making the first ever American-made animated feature to get that rating. For Steve France, this began as a nightmare, thinking this would be nothing but a porn flick, and see that not many studios want to stream it. They didn't try to get it but the MPAA clearly didn't care. However, the streamers, they saw it as a gold mine to me. With advertisements in the press saying, he's X-rated animated and we're not rated X for nothing, baby. When this movie was released on April 12, 1972, this little indie film would rock the nation. Keep in mind, the budget of this film was said to be around $700,000, and it would become not only one of the most successful independent films of 1972, but one of the most successful independent animated films ever, making a grand total of $90 million. As for the critics, it was a bit more mixed. While said best, to those who liked it, it was a good time, and everyone else wanted him dead. But while those critics were dead, no one ever had much more hatred than Robert Crumb himself. Politely, he generally didn't like it, and by generally didn't like it, I mean that he wanted his name out of the credits, and said that he used the character without his license, falsified his identity, which is not true because Crumb also is known to have one of the world's biggest egos, said that they signed the contract without his knowledge. Yeah, talk about being a huckster. And not long after the contract release, they released Fritz The Cat Superstar, where in the end...
They've killed Fritz! They've killed Fritz! Those lousy, stinking yellow fairies! Those horrible atrocity-filled vermin! Those despicable animal warmongers! They've killed Fritz!
Oh, and did I mention that Crumb would never use character again after this? But, even with all that, Crumb actually would try his best. Crumb as his first ever test in animation. And Crumb in itself, well, I do have my own faults with Fritz The Cat, being that it's rather disjointed and all. I feel like for a first attempt, Bakshi did a great job for what he could do. The animation is rather fluent. The character Fritz, although can be quite a dick at times, isn't much, both how it gets out. And for all its faults, I will say this, I think it actually works out very well for what could have been a first attempt. It's not bad. It's actually quite decent. So while that was the first film ever actually make, he actually wanted to make a different film afterwards that went by the title of Heavy Traffic. It's the life of Michael Corleone, a 22... Wait, hold on a second. I think I got the wrong footage, let me just fix that for a second. Yeah. It's the life of Michael Corleone, a 22-year-old animator who lives in New York City with his Italian mother and his father and his Jewish mother, who always want to seem to kill each other. His life turns around when he gets into a relationship with a black bartender named named Carol, and initially the two have to try and survive the crazy city that they live in. For Ralph Bakshi, there was nothing more important than working on heavy traffic. He even rejected working on a sequel to Fritz the Cat, called The 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat. Speaking of which, animator Robert Taylor would come back to the movie, and the only people who actually stayed on were producer Steve Krantz and Skip Hinnant as the voice of Fritz. The movie was released in 1974 under the name The 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat, and unlike Bakshi's film, this was a box office disappointment. But anyways, he was able to get work with renowned speed producer Samuel Z. Alcott to help make the film. But while his relationship with Alcott was doing great, I can't say the same thing with his relationship with Krantz. During production, despite Fritz the Cat being a hit, Bakshi didn't get his cut of money. So, in 1973, he contacted Krantz to know where the hell is the money. Krantz told him this: the movie didn't make any money, that's just a hell of a lot of noise. Which Bakshi was confused by when why he's making a sequel, where all that money was, and how did he buy a BMW and Beverly Hills mansion? Like, where did that come from? Of course, he realized something was up with this. Bakshi then decided to not have a lawyer time, so he had to ask some other producing firms. But I don't know if you know these friends, they're just rather small and up and coming, like Martin Scorsese or Steven Spielberg or Francis Ford Coppola. Yeah, just like the little indie guys. Okay, I'm kidding obviously, but eventually Bakshi realized he had been played at. This is why he decided to work on his next film, Harlem Nights, this time without Krantz. When Krantz got word about this, Bakshi said, I can't talk about that. The next day, Krantz literally locked him out of the studio while, effectively firing Ralph Bakshi as the director of Heavy Traffic. That means Bakshi couldn't be in the home studio while he was working. All this film was being made, and Krantz found a new director, which he trying to have happen Chuck Jones. However, this is where the new director gets in, both physically and literally. When Alcott got wind about this, he threatened Krantz that he would walk out with the money in tow if he doesn't get Bakshi back, because he knew that this was not like Eddie's possession. For Alcott, what made Fritz the Cat unique is that it came from one creative vision. There was just a bunch of animators lying around, and then one person takes the credits. Ralph Bakshi was the sole heir to that film, and the sole creative vision to see why. And which is why it was such a phenomenon when it got at least. So, when he heard about this, he wanted a Ralph Bakshi movie, not a Steve Krantz movie. Got it? 1 week later, Bakshi was back in the studio. But not everything was all sunshine and roses, obviously. Krantz still trying to make himself the big hit maker, even seeing this was his movie again. But Alcott reminded him that this is Bakshi's movie, not his. After this fiasco, by the way, Bakshi and Krantz would no longer speak to each other up until Krantz's death in 2007. But going back into it, the film itself has many different themes. If you've ever seen Heavy Traffic, then you would see that the film usually has a huge stream of pinball. That's because Ralph is a major pinball player. And you would see more and more how pinball would affect his cartoons. But he actually plays it with his sons too. But it's not only that, but it's also his life in Brooklyn, his Jewish and foreign origins. Even then, Michael himself is an underground cartoonist and actually kind of looks like Ralph at the time. But I just want to emphasize that Michael is not a cartoon Ralph. For the movie, Bakshi wanted more things done, including having actors ad-lib their lines, have the movie have real photographs, and have some live-action scenes. Even having actors that could have been up-and-comers like Joseph Kaufman as Michael. Kaufman was actually getting more movies afterwards, but unfortunately he died on September 4th, 1973, less than a month after the film got released. This would make Heavy Traffic his first and only lead role in a film. Ironically enough, one thing that Krantz was also worried about would be if this film had too many pictures of sets. Like if this could have been mistaken for a porno. Despite everything, including the famous Maybelline scene, that's not one of these movies still get X-rating. But that's not a problem. Thanks to the release of Fritz the Cat and success of it, studios were being more okay with allowing anime films to get made exclusively for adults. And when it was released, the movie was a big hit, making Bakshi the first producer since Walt Disney to get 2 anime films these successful in a row. Although it was banned in the Canadian province about Berta, so there is that. Afterwards, though, now that it's a real Ralph Bakshi movie, the critics loved it. Even Conscious Means New York Times wrote this. People who felt that his earlier feature, Fritz The Cat, merely debased the Jewish original, can now judge Bakshi's own development of his own material and think that the development is as brilliant as anything in recent movies, as brilliant and as incomparable as it is in its way, as lovely as it is sad. And I think that Heavy Traffic is a great movie. This is like if you would take a Andy Warhol painting or a Lou Reed song, but adapt it into a movie. Seeing both how New York is both beautiful, but has a very seedy underbelly in the same way, with how the New York area can be full of just people who you just walk around and just think, okay, I see you around. Michael and Carol are also great protagonists. Michael is someone who doesn't know what he wants to do with his life yet. He's just a young amateur who doesn't know. Politely, he says it in movie.
Shorty can't roll that ball.
I'm gonna tell you, Carol, I don't want to sell my cartoons to one of them places. They ain't gonna buy that crap anyway. I'm an underground cartoonist. That's where I belong.
And not only that, but it adds to tone by having everything look just actually more and more distorted at times. This is a movie where, despite everything, it has an earnestness to it. And I think that the reason why Heavy Traffic has remained a favorite of mine personally is because it's really good. And it captures New York as its own unique character. Though not everything ages great, but there are elements here that are great still. Despite having some cautious troubles, Bakshi did eventually make a film that not only was beautiful, but many fans also still consider it his best work. But let's see how he does with his other work later on. After the release of both Fritz The Cat and Heavy Traffic, the world seemed to get a trend of making adult-oriented animated films come from wherever the hell in the world they'd be. I'm talking about films like Tarzoon, Shame of the Jungle, Down and Dirty Duck, Once Upon a Girl, King Dick, and so many more. However, what all these films lacked was that Bakshi made his films wholly unique. These were merely ripping off Bakshi style. It's not that every movie made during this time was not good. It's just that Bakshi films were all original for him. And that's something that no one had. And that was to be shown in his next film. However, while his next film would be Smooth Production, it'd also be easily his most controversial film ever. And that film is simply known as Coonskin. It's about the story of three brothers: Brother Rabbit, Brother Bear, and Preacher Fox. They move out of their home to a new neighborhood in Harlem. But they realize it's not the black paradise they thought it would be. So, Brother Rabbit decides to become the new crime lord to get rid of these scammers in the neighborhood. But to do that, he has to deal with some tough opponents, like a racist white cop and the Godfather and his cross-dressing sons. It all started when Bakshi met up with a producer named Al Ruddy, who was fresh off making another great film, The Godfather. Because Bakshi had no idea what thinking, he decided instead just to pitch him a random idea: Uncle Remus. And with that being said, he made his next movie to go. Oh, and by the way, I am aware that there's another reinstatation, but we're not going to talk about Song South in this one case, just wanted to know. Anyways, now that Bakshi was without crayons, he is fully ready to go and make his next movie. This time, he held nothing back. He wanted to portray everything in the way that, there you go, I'm totally scared. Like how a sexist, bigoted white man would see all things. For African Americans, he made them have the full blackface regalia. Complete with Uncle Toms and Manny's. The white boys don't get much shade either. Often portrayed as slick and sleazy con men who don't care about their own racism or their own manlyhood. As for the gay guys, they prance around in what can be considered the sluttiest outfits for a girl and are thirsty for dick 24/7, even if it's their own brothers. But remember asking yourself, why put all these negative stereotypes in movies? Do you know the phrase, fight fire with fire? Bakshi was taking these stereotypes and making a mockery out of it. Sure, black folks are pretty bad, but the crackers are far worse. Even presenting Miss America as a busty and buxom blonde was a metaphor for how America would often treat the black folk, only to leave them left cold with blue balls.
You can take me. Come on, fella.
Oh, she got to clap.
However, while Bakshi is portraying those things at stereotyping, his biggest trait is that he is portraying the mafia. Bakshi has made it quite open that despite liking The Godfather, he doesn't like how it was a hero worship of the mafia. So in this film, he portrays them as a bunch of freaks and clowns in service with their own underground operations. So, as he wanted, this movie was made for shocking imagery and wants to treat the audience with just this imagery that's distinct and just uniquely his own. But while let's see how this movie is about, let's see how this movie actually is. Okay? Unlike his previous films, Bakshi actually had a prominent cast. This includes actor Philip Michael Thomas as Rabbit, who will later appear in the Miami Vice series, playwright Charles Godin as Preacher Fox, and legendary soul singer Barry White as Brother Bear. They also play each other in the live-action segments, by the way, where also features prolific actor Scatman Crothers as Pappy. The movie is equivalent of Uncle Remus. Speaking of which, Crothers also did their own song, to which, well, I am still a half white, so I'm gonna leave this here and you can fill in the blanks. But not only that, but there also are some key twists to add when Bakshi would make this film in his own way that can come to evoke Rabbit's tricks.
Expect me to do anything you want, but don't let my poor body fling through that open window and slap down hard on the concrete below. I'm begging you, don't throw me out that window. 'Cause I was born and raised in a garbage can.
As time moved on, the film itself would eventually gain some names. The original name of this film was originally Harlem Nights. However, they later tried Coonskin no more, so trying it to put just Coonskin, make it more provocative. Now you would think that this movie would be safe in terms of everything, right? Well, maybe the production, yes, but when it got released, this is where the production gets a tad chaotic and pretty fucked up all around. Okay, the movie was planned to premiere at the Museum of Modern Art. However, the Congress of Racial Equality, aka CORE, was ready to protest the film. Why? Well, despite the fact that literally none of the people from CORE saw it, and again, maybe one guy read the script. I'm actually unclear on that. Well, this movie uses blackface, and that is not okay. When the Q&A session, the leader of the group, Elaine Parker, was ready to fight. Well, Ralph tried to keep his cool and stuff. Greg Kildy actually mentioned Larry Kiddish, who was a staff member, and said this: about halfway into the film, maybe 10 minutes of CORE showed up, and the CORE showed up. They walked up and down the aisles and were very belligerent. In my estimation, that was determined not to like the film. Some of their friends had read the script and to believe it was detrimental to their image of blacks. The Q&A answers with Bakshi have followed quickly collapsed into chaos of a shouting match. But while that film was there, it also made the film not great reviews. Parker actually said, the film says this: "Princess of slaves, hustlers, and whores. It is a very racist film to me and very insulting." So yeah, the protesting on this first event was not made very public, and so much so that Paramount and the had to just drop the film, despite being on the film's side, as well as the NAACP, or the National Association for the Advancements of Colored People, if you want to know. Eventually, Bakshi did get a should with the Weinstein production company, thinking maybe the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But you know what's funny? The city was also made by the mafia. So let me get it straight. A film that has made by the same people who made The Godfather is a tie slam on the mafia. I don't know how many levels of ironic this was. Afterwards, Bakshi just decided to make some new cuts. Oh, not to make people core, he just wanted to move some of the movie's unnecessary swearing. Afterwards, the film was finally released under a new distributor on August 20th, 1975. However, it did not wait. Cole was still picketing and out more and more, even going so far as to throw smoke bombs and tear gas into the theater to get people out from watching the film. Hell, Martin Scorsese said he even saw it during Taxi Driver in his production. But if you think that Paul was still a mess around, we really haven't seen before, you'll find that the other side of the political spectrum can be just as wacky. During the film's release, Bakshi was getting congratulated, chows and cheers from Republican politicians, Hollywood elites, right-wing conglomerates, and even extremist groups like the KKK. All because they thought he made an anti-black film, showing that even back then, Republicans do not like to listen to the facts. But despite any of that, if you actually want the people who actually did see Coonskin, then they will tell you that they loved it. Okay, maybe not everybody, but the big praise did come from the big publishers. Like the New York Times wrote this: Coonskin could be his masterpiece, a shattering and successful effort to use an uncommon art form, cartoons and live action combined, to convey a hallucinatory lines and frustrating message of American city life, specifically black city life. Lyrically violent, but yet in no way does it exploit violence. Variety called the film a brutal satire of the streets. Not for all taste, not avant-garde. The target is youth movie comics in the underground. But the film may have died off at the box office, it eventually gained a cult following during these days, and is still regarded as one of his Bakshi's best works. And thinking for me personally, this is a very, very provocative film, and yet it works so well. It works so well and it delivers message that despite not having a unique animation style, it really does message how America treats everyone, how whoever takes down all these forces, from bad faith actors to crooked cops, the mafia, and America itself, in a way that feels wholly organic and original. Not everything is just great. I have an issue with how Bakshi portrays gay people as these sadomasochistic creatures who dress like they're women and are thirsty for another man's cock. But still, it's not. Still, this is a film from the 70s. I kinda am not really surprised by that notion nowadays. Actually, in fact, do you know how this film is harsh? Here's how it starts.
Fuck you.
Seriously, how many films can you think of that saw a random character looking straight at you and say, "Fuck you"? It's absolutely rude, but this is probably one of the greatest opening lines in cinema history. And the movie cleverly plays on that idea too, adding to this intense message of how America treats black people, and not only how they puts them down, but more. And while the film may have died in the box office, Bakshi considers Coonskin his best film. And honestly, it's very close. While I do prefer Heavy Traffic, it is not. Coonskin is a very, very close second in my opinion. But I think the best way to describe Coonskin is actually looking at the bottom of this 1987 VHS, to which title was changed from Street Fight and was released distributed by Zedon Pictures, where it describes that this film offends everybody. Afterwards, Bakshi decided to make his next film after this called Hey Good Lookin. We'll talk about the production of Hey Good Lookin later, but in a sense, he got good distribution with Warner Brothers, but after seeing the production of Coonskin and more, he had a bit. It was not great. Hey Good Lookin was also mentioned in live action animation in a way that had been tested out in Heavy Traffic and in Coonskin, but after seeing the finished product, Warner Brothers just was no longer interested in releasing improvements. This left Ralph Bakshi in a bit of a bind. Not only is this film no longer in distributors, but now everyone is knowing how notorious he can be. I mean, after Coonskin, studios got more and more weary with him when they realized that he could make a film that films with sex, violence, and depictions of negative stereotypes. It's just too much of a risk. With that in mind, he decided to go in a bit of a similar direction. And decided to make his next movie to try and get out of the streets and into a world that he loves very much fantasy. So he would try it out, a movie that he would title as Wizards. Set of millions of years after today, the Earth is now in a nuclear war that has fantasy creatures. One of the creatures is named Avatar. Is on a journey to stop his evil brother Black Wolf king of the world, along with his friends Eleanor, a fairy training, Weehawk, an elf warrior, and Peace, a robotic assassin turned good. While he was making the area and go through. The idea actually started as a production called T-Wit back in the 1960s, even before he was making Fritz The Cat. Right. But while that project never got off the ground, he still had more and more to get films. But while he making his film, he had to figure out ways to add this up and using the dangerous propaganda. Bakshi says this. It was about the creation of state in the Holocaust, about the Jews looking for a homeland, and about fascism and how it was on the rise again. This is why they actually did the Free Palestine, as the Nazis taken over and some Jewish families like Bakshi's. After working on his films, he actually went on the cast as working on film afterwards, trying to get the whole thing done. After trying to make it work, he actually ran out of money on the animated salary boost. He then decided to go ask for a damn amount at $26 to increase his budget. But it wasn't that much. It was just about an extra $5,500, $50,000. But unfortunately, Alan Ladd just said no. How coincidentally, Bakshi was in another room that actually had another director who was actually trying to ask his film to go pay over budget, and that was George Lucas when he was making the first Star Wars movie, A New Hope. Afterwards, they both agreed that this rest of the film had to be funded out of their own pockets, and eventually had to ask things. By the way, this would be the only cast Bakshi and Lucas would have, along with the same release year in 1997. Because Wizards came out a few months before Star Wars, Lucas decided as Ralph, if he could change his film name to be War Wizards, just Wizards, to get lost confusion that here's a film that with the word war in the title, which Ralph was okay with. Also, during production, Ralph asked for one of his actors from Star Wars to come into it to actually do his first voice acting role, which would lead us to the very successful voice acting career of Mark Hamill, playing the character of Sean, the son of the king of mountain berries.
Please accept our apologies for the behavior of some of our more carefree brothers. I'm Sean, leader of the Knights of Stardust, protectors of Dolan, king of the mountain fairies.
Another common voice actor they brought in would be Susan Tyrell, who would be the narrator of the film. At first, she was a bit annoyed by this idea. She didn't want to do any film, but years later, she changed her mind because it was one of the most prolific roles afterwards. Afterwards, Bakshi had figured out a way to make the film less and less, differently, and decided to use a technique that he had discovered called rotoscoping. The art of tracing over all the visuals and hand paint on action footage and paint on the animation. Now, rotoscoping is very hard to do and can be very unique in a sense. And while it was a bit scratchy, Bakshi did actually use rotoscoping from many scenes to help out and fix a lot of the issues in hand. Although Bakshi has said that wasn't there. However, when it got released in February of 1977, there was another big catch for Star Wars infection. The film was massive, so much so that Star Wars actually overshadowed Wizards, and Wizards gave it more of a limited release, only about $9 million. Still a hit, but not exactly what he would be up for. As for the critics, while it was mixed, a lot of the critics actually really liked it, saying that a lot of his fantasy methods as a new way to help out. Wizards actually is probably Bakshi's most well-known film, as it really does help maintain everything, and with it being used in fan bases all around. In fact, the most famous image from Bakshi is actually using the poster where it contains Peace riding on an alien horse creature. As for the film itself, for me, it's actually pretty fun, honestly. Well, I wouldn't say it's his best work. I'd say this is easily what a great film is. As a love of fans myself, Bakshi's version of Wizards is like a novel quest in video game, having that kind of unique style that really drives home the point. He even tries more and more to make things. While this film's not perfect, I think I can admire how it goes in with a somewhat ridiculous story. Nonetheless, after Wizards, he would then make his next big film, The Lord of the Rings. I'm pretty sure you all know about The Lord of the Rings, but let's go into a bit of a refresher. It's about a hobbit named Frodo Baggins who acquires a ring that's created by near darkness by the evil wizard Sauron. A friend of his friend named Gandalf warns him on this great ring that he has, and that should never fall into the wrong hands. After this, he decides to go get one of his friends, Sam, Merry, and Pippin. They all agree to have a council meeting, and they're thrown into a volcano, but can never get this to again. Now, Frodo has traveled with many friends on his quest to try and ring from falling into the wrong hands. These days, everyone knows The Lord of the Rings is a popular franchise by Peter Jackson. But back then, it was just 3 books, and that's about it. So, well, Ralph actually was introduced to these books during the mid-50s, and always been a fan of it. In 1969, United Artists actually acquired the rights. During this time, the Beatles, believe it or not, actually wanted to be in the film, and they were actually trying to get ways of getting in. Unfortunately, they also tried to get the director Dennis Neal and Stanley Kubrick to do the film. Too bad Stanley Kubrick is one of those people who believes acting can't be done. And also Tolkien was going against having the Fab Four appear in his movies, so The Lord of the Rings starring John, Paul, George, and Ringo was basically knocked out of the park. While that was happening, they actually decided on trying a different version, and Bakshi did. Bakshi's always been a fan of the book, so he decided to try it out, and they asked him. So while they're because whatever you made script, Bakshi decided to test out and try to make a film. So Bakshi decided to make a new script that also added new elements. This new script was still seemed to be impossible, was still valid to 1975. I mean, seriously? 3 large books crammed into a film that's not into one film. I had to check. The average movie script is around maybe 130 pages. Unless that thing is maybe around 12 hours long, a 700-page script doesn't really work in the same case nowadays. Or even back then without being utterly confusing. So, this new script was handed Bakshi, and Bakshi decided instead of making a bit in one film, he decided to split into 2 afterwards. And decided to take this on with a damn Melnick at MGM. This seems to work until Melnick was going away from MGM, and the MGM house got the project.
Overtook. Throw yourself in next time. Be quiet. Fool.
Okay, time plan B then. Instead of doing that, he decided to go to Saul Zazian, who helped him from Fritz The Cat. Because of it, who at the time was working at best. At the time, he had just gone with a big hit with the film One Blew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Afterwards, decided to capture the realness of the book, but he decided to actually ask if he could do the rules for almost the entire movie. Meaning that the film would actually take the live action film and the animated film afterwards. And doing all this seemed to be kind of confusing, but it would make sense in the end to him, he would say. Well, she then also made sure that animators is going to do doubles. This include, some of them were played by the same actors, others would be played by someone else, including John Hurt as Aragorn, the brothers Christopher and Dominic Gard as Frodo and Pippin respectively, and Anthony Daniels as Legolas. Oh hey look, another Bakshi Star Wars connection! There was even at one point, Rolling Stones singer Mick Jagger was actually part of the feature. Anyways, Bakshi then wanted scenes to be shot away and shot them in Spain, despite the union bosses not really liking it. In fact, he actually filmed one scene when they went out to lunch and actually filmed that one scene, the battle scene. After filming it all though, the producers almost incinerated the whole film because, they thought his cinematography was sloppy. No one has actual cinematography, but they thought actually having other ways after. They thought that a medieval fantasy shouldn't have helicopter lines, cars driving by, and helicopters flying as well. Guess they didn't remember that Bakshi was planning to get rid of those scenes by animating them out. But But initially, he did want to have some natural scenes, like the scene of Gandalf on Balrog. But instead, the only scene to not be rose-gold would be the scene with Treebeard.
A hasty word for something that has stood here.
Initially for the film, Bakshi wanted the works of Led Zeppelin to be in the middle, which, well, as some of the songs do contain passages from Tolkien's work, like Ramble On and About Evermore.
To stay for tea and have some fun. I hear forests thunder down in the valley below. But Gollum, at the evil one, crept up and slipped away with her.
But however, he couldn't get the music rights, so instead he actually got an original soundtrack from Jack and Dan. In total, the running time of this film is 133 minutes, or 2 hours and 13 minutes. Making this up until 2023, when Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse got released, the longest animated film ever made in animated features. With Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse finally being at an hour and 20 minutes instead. Well, it was really hard, Bakshi did eventually split this up into two movies. A movie about the Reigns of Hush of Rain, and the latter one being about the Return of the King. Bakshi even is bound to have the title be called The Lord of the Rings Part 1 as a way to ensure people wouldn't get confused that this was only half a movie. But not only did they remove the Part 1 thinking that but they also just marketed it as the title The Lord of the Rings. When it was released on November 15th, 1978 in the US and then July 15th, 1979 in the UK, the film actually did pretty well in box office, gained $32.2 million on a $4 million budget. As for critics, it was more mixed. They liked the artistry and how it was done, but they were more mixed upon how it adapted the books and how some key details were there. However, for Tolkien fans, it was not good, as it was really mixed as Tolkien fans as there was missing some key scenes and some key characters were cut out eventually. However, even then, it did get work. And going from my experience, while I admit that the Peter Jackson films are way better, this one's actually pretty good. Good for what it is. Yes, it gets a big Cliff Notes version, and unfortunately, as Peter Jackson proved, you need more than one movie to get the full scope of the first two Lord of the Rings books. Bakshi does prove that it can be done, even if it isn't as good as others would think. It does try its best, and I think that it does try everything it can. A few years after this version, by the way, Lincoln Bass would actually release their own version of Return of the King, as they only done work with Tolkien on their version of The Hobbit. And suddenly, I guess they have a change of tune about the Bakshi version, because we'll have all face out.
Where there's a whip, there's a way. Where there's a whip, there's a way. Where there's a whip, we don't wanna go to war today.
Yeah, hate to say it, but I think the Bakshi version saved it up. Okay? Yeah. But it was also a huge help to get the film back on release, as it was a huge help to make Peter Jackson's version of the film. In fact, there are actually several scenes that appear marched for the Bakshi version.
Grubs, chubs, brace girdles, good bodies, bulges, horn blowers, and proud foots.
Proud feet.
Soldiers! Race girdles! And proud foots!
But even without a Return of the King movie, it would live on as the one franchise to rule them all. Bakshi would more movies afterwards. What will those movies be? We'll find out after the break.
Jack Deeves thought he created a perfect woman.
Come to me.
The perfect world.
Hey, Jack.
Noids do not have sex with doodles. It's the oldest law in Cool World.
You're not in Kansas anymore.
Indulge your fantasies.
This place should be erased.
Hey, it's a living. I just want to be real.
Cool World.
Glad you dropped it.
Rated PG-13. Starts Friday, July 10th at theaters everywhere.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, where we left off, you would think that Bakshi would make a Return of the King movie, right? Well, not so fast. In fact, Ralph is very much a person who doesn't do adaptations all that much. Instead, he wants to make films all really is unique to him. In fact, that's what he likes doing best. And he decided to make his next film fully based on animation, making it that was a bit more personal to him with American Pop. The film follows a family who had the way of music. is Zelmy, who was in 20th century, who was in burlesque house, who tries to sing it, but his shot on his neck, that moves his voice. Benny, his son, who jazz pianist, who eventually rolls in World War II. Tony, a songwriter who eventually, during the hip movement, who eventually got heroin, and Pete, a drug dealer during the 1970s, who wants to actually make music instead of selling coke in the punk rock movement. After finishing up the Lord of the Rings, Bakshi decided to work something more personal, which is how everybody feels like it. He likes to listen to some popular tunes of the day. Okay, with all that stuff right there. Now, with all that being said, he decided to go back to an producer, Dan Melnick, whom after being fired out by MGM, would be now working at Columbia Pictures instead to work on his next film. He knew that this would easily work, and Bob decided to make the film truly about that too. He also decided to use the rotoscope, which is that he used on All the Wings again, to make it entirely rotoscope as well, making the film look unique conditionally. He also was able to get a lot of music rights too. But the film does have a soundtrack by Lee Holdridge. Thanks to Bakshi's reputation in the animation markets, he was able to get work by major musicians. This includes Bob Dylan, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, the Doors, the Mamas and the Papas, Louis Prima, Louis Reed, Jefferson Airplane, and so many more. One of the best part is, this all costs under $1 million for the fees. So it actually worked out pretty well. Maybe it was a bit of a headache when Columbia released on home media, but that's not Bakshi's problem at all. Even then, he did still want to make a movie about people in Brownsville, for the dreamers who don't really make it up in the big music world, and trying to make it more about people who don't really get worked down. Will it be for people who die at very young ages, or people who struggle afterwards? He also want to make this thing feel real for a musician afterwards, showing the true tales of how musicians oftentimes can have their own issues afterwards, whether it be through drugs or drugs.
Danke.
For the film itself, Bakshi did eventually have the whole film made in Moscow, using the watercolors to help out. And while he did decide to make the film huge, it did end up doing okay. When it released on February 15, 1981, it did fine. It received about $6 million on a $5 million budget. Yeah, technically means it broke even, but compared to other Bakshi films, it was more up and down in terms of the budget. The reviews were more mixed and average. However, it did release some positive reviews with how it doesn't work and going by how it is personally, it's very good actually. It really captures the therapeutic essence of how a film about the era of music itself, whether it be going through the 20th century with Zelmy and how he eventually has to go to crime once his voice fails him afterwards. Benny, who starts trying to go into World War II, only to get shot by a Nazi soldier, and Tony, who started with a lot of promise, but then due to drug use, he eventually has to eventually gets wasted in the same way a lot of other musicians from the 60s and 70s end up either dead or just broke and homeless. And it's all ended Pete finally showing up to the crowd and finally seeing doing what his family was trying to do the whole time, trying to be successful in a way. And it's really unique in how it captivates the whole story. Right. While the film itself is not plus I can't help but it's something parallels. Like the hippies, like the whole bad situation does feel like a parallel to how Big Brother and the holding company would end up being with Emily and Janis Joplin, with Frankie easily being a parody of Janis's whole life. It's very unique and very adult. But while Bakshi became Wizard all the ways in it, there was one movie that he was working on for years, and even after it got released, it was wacky. And that film was titled Hey, Good Lookin. It's set in 1953 Brooklyn when street game, and the leader Vinny Genzina, I'm not sure how to pronounce that correctly, is Italian and I don't speak Italian, so yeah. Also have friends with his friend Crazy Shapiro. Well, he does read out his old flame Wazzy. See, he runs up a beach with another gang of the chaplains and Leah Boogaloo, who sent a rumble. Now, Crazy really has to say strong crew and be strong. But there you go. Girls, prepare for the rumble. Well, the film actually started all the way back in 1974 when Bakshi was done with the direction of Coonskin. He wanted his next film to actually blend live-action animation in a way that was wholly unique to it. Granted, he did do that before in Heavy Traffic and in Coonskin, but he wanted the whole film to really marry the two mediums. While he was there, he wanted to make the whole film feel he actually casting down and more to get the ceremonies in the streets of New York City, having a community take. Like his earlier films, Bakshi has actors heavily improvises the dialogue. In fact, he actually even shot them at lunch on a break when they were trying to act in the 1950s. He knew that this was going to work, and he tried to do so. So he even got the band, the glam punk band, the New York Dolls, to play some gay guys. To which, I mean, it is kind of throwback to his older films, but also I can't imagine it being positive just looking at his older films. Afterwards, he decided. He added more background stuff, and made the film work well. He even made a 3-minute pitch reel to show the Warner Brothers in 1975 who tried to catch it up. All seemed to go well for Good Lookin, except for one thing. Coonskin. The production of Coonskin, the controversy of Coonskin was going like wildfire as you and made the script. Despite Good Lookin actually being less provocative, the companies actually got scared and decided not to fund, and they didn't want to know if it was going to be released afterwards. Just didn't work. Not only that, but they also feel this method of live-action animation really not looking great, and they were unhappy, making it look unreleasable. Now, Warner Brothers themselves, the company who was distributing it, did not give up on Good Lookin after all. Already, after making sure Francis decided not to work. Decided to redo the whole movie, after not getting a lawsuit. This includes having the actors re-record their lines, and scrap the idea of having real songs in the movie, and instead the soundtrack can be done by John Madera, and move all of the live-action scenes, with the exception of the rumble scene where the chaplain's breakdancing have been roscoped. Oh, did I mention that Warner Brothers would no longer give Bakshi any more money? This would mean that Bakshi basically had to fund an entire film out of his own two pockets. As you can tell, many people would actually just give up. But Bakshi eventually just was very determined in his film that he didn't want his love life in the 1950s go away. So whatever funds he would have from Wizards, American Pop, and Lord of the Rings, he would use that to help finish Good Lookin. It did take a lot of time, Bakshi had to swallow a hell of a lot of pride, but eventually, he finished what made people about being possible, and that is finish Good Lookin 2.0. When during the 1980s, Brothers did come back to release again. They decided to actually try again, mainly because of what made some kind of bit of a reboot thanks to films like Heavy Metal and Bakshi's very own American Pop. However, when it got released on October 1st, 1982, it went almost unnoticed. It only got released in New York and Los Angeles to little attention. It is possible that the film did do better in some areas, but in America it was practically a no-show. As for critics, it was more mixed at best. Saying that the film, while it did look nice and it did not look done, it was very derivative of other Bakshi books and just didn't have that same punch as other films. And going off of my review, I have to kind of side with them. Well, Good Lookin isn't a bad movie. And visually looks great, and the soundtrack is actually pretty good. It's just that it's way too derivative of other movies. It either feels like trying to be like other rock box films like Heavy Traffic, or trying to be like most of these Mean Streets. Hell, it almost is. It is, as both Richard Ramones and David Poivil are both in the movie, both movies. So yeah, it could be either way too. And honestly, there's potential here, but it's just under delivers on what it is, not potential. But while that it did eventually gain the recognition of other people, including director Quentin Tarantino, an actual fan of Bakshi's work. But while that version may be out there, it doesn't mean the original version is lost forever. According to Ralph himself, one might possibly own a never seen director's cut of that original version. So maybe it's no in vain. It may tell a story of recent 1950s, but for Bakshi, it told how Pride is also a bit of a downfall production. Afterwards, he decided to step away from the streets again and decided to work back on another film with an old friend he had in the past, Frank Frazetta, on the film Fire and Ice. Nice. It's about two warring nations, Ice Peak and Fire Peak. Ice Peak had evil Queen Juliana and her son Necron, who sent forth a wave of glaciers, which is forced people to go south of the equator. Necron then sends his troops over to the Fire Peak to King Jarol to basically surrender, and also kidnaps his daughter Tigra as a result. Now up to a warrior named Lorne and a dark-haired figure named Darkwolf to actually save the Burnout. Not only did Bakshi, like I mentioned before, Bakshi decided to work with Frank Frazetta on this film to help out. As he released this. Not only that, but this was based on a trend that was happening at the same time of these muscle-backed action heroes saving women in this piece of clothing. Seeing films like The Beastman Master, Conan the Barbarian, and He-Man as part of examples. When they heard of when they decided to enter into fantasy films, which film, and decided to go working at Fox, on film at 20th Century Fox. The same investors who made it pop. As 20th Century Fox had a great relationship with Wizards. Bakshi again also started to use voice copying to help the film make the realism work out. But making the film look like a real Rosette painting, having to work on actual artists, including James Gunnery, who worked on many dinosaur scenes, and on the Fox creator Pierre Chon, who actually worked on the film while he was also working on Disney. Not only that, but the voice copying will be done by actors, but some of the actors are also portrayed by someone else. Well, some of them are just basic subhuman scenes. Other ones were main characters like Lorne, Tigra, Necron, Queen Juliana, and Tigra's tutor, as just some examples. When the film finally got released on August 19, 1993, unfortunately, it did not do great. It got mixed reviews and made less than $1 million at the box office, despite being a widely released movie. Like on this itself, while haven't seen many action movies, I can see the appeal of this movie. And although the story is one I've heard before, it does try its best to be visually unique in a way that actually could work. And although it's not exactly Ralph Bakshi's best work, he does try to make it work in a way that is possible. And credits some rating were mixed. Fire and Ice was trying there, but while Fire and Ice was being released, it also left Bakshi with a burnout. After Fire and Ice wrapped, Bakshi said best in his own text, "I was burnt the fuck out," and he just couldn't get any new productions made. Most people he actually allowed and looked up to were dead. Hollywood still viewed him as a highly controversial director, and there was no longer that spice of dynamism that he had previously. Not only that, but Bakshi was no longer just unique. The early 80s were just a harder time for anime films. Either trying to be more mature and trying to make more films like this, or they were just not working out in the same ways. No matter what, he would try to make more films, they'll be fueled away by his own fashion. He tried to get books done by Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, The Bandmans, Maggie, A Girl on the Streets, Mike Hammer, and a Sherlock Holmes edition. But they all said no. He even turned down opportunities that were basically handed to him, like Something Wicked This Way Comes by Rap Bravery, or Philip Dick's book Do Androids to Dream of Electric Sheep, where he would pass it to Lily Scott so he could make Blade Runner. However, one film that he was really into, was book Catcher in the Rye. As he saw parallels to what his current life situation was and the situation back then. He actually even tried to contact the person who worked on it, J.D. Salinger. Unfortunately, Salinger is against making any women's books, and Bakshi is no exception. Well, Salinger just did admit that he liked the books, it's just impossible in his eyes to see a version being made. So, with that being said, Bakshi decided to work on. He did decide to make a retire and focus on painting. He did make a screenplay for a film called If I Catch Her, I Kill Her, but when he shown as well after his first marriage, but it didn't go anywhere. Afterwards, he just paint and paint and paint. That's until the 1980s when he would hire for another job. It was manager Tony Kane, the manager of the rock band The Rolling Stones, one of the biggest fans of Bakshi's work at the time, and asked him to do the music video for this. They covered Bob and L's Harlem Shuffle. However, this also turned into madness, as production of this thing was hell. They actually wanted to have a through line of the animation and live action together. But the live action was shot for one day. The animation was completely unchecked. Cameras wasn't shot no matter what. And the band's flight got delayed by a snowstorm. Not only that, but they had a hell of a strict deadline too. As it was meant to come out in 1985, when the Rolling Stones were also at the same time for their Lifetime Achievement Awards. As such, no continuity was made in this film whatsoever. But after all that, he finally got a version out. But that is another issue entirely with Bakshi's work. After working on a Harlem Shuffle music video, he actually got help by another project he was developing called Bobby's Girl. Let's see on the teen films of the era. Which he said helped out by making the film with his friends that he met in the industry, John Crispolucci, who would later make the Ren and Stimpy show. I will tell you more, but John Crispolucci is kind of a creep in real life. So yeah. And while he was trying to work out, TriStar eventually didn't want to make the film after their heads got changed. And they did try another version called Susie Loves Bobby, but nothing worked out. It just didn't come around. Afterwards, though, he would try to make as many projects work, though. He would then go to CBS to pitch as many projects as he could. Good. He tried projects that no one tried before, but none of them worked out. Until he eventually bulged up to his new project and said that I own the rights to my mouse. Well, that wasn't true. CBS did still own them, so it was still available, and he did eventually make it. So, in a sense, he decided to make Mighty Mouse and New Adventures. And to his credit, he showed out it actually did go better than he thought it would. As the show follows, of course, Mighty Mouse. Now, as he tries to say, or in case Mike Mouse, as a party worker, as he tries to save him from numerous villains, including characters along with his friends, Scrappy Mouse, Bat, and Tick the Belt Wonder, and usually saving the characters of pure heart at the same time. Now, you may be wondering, who is Mighty Mouse actually? Well, Mighty Mouse is a character created by Terry Timmons, Ralph's old working place, believe it or not. Originally started in 1942, created by the cartoon Mouse Tomorrow, he was originally named Super Mouse, as he was a straightforward mouse version of Superman.
He dines on super cheese. And behold, a super mouse.
Yeah, he eventually did gain some designs, but Mighty Mouse was being made and redesigned. His name Mighty Mouse was originally made in his first cartoon, The Wreck of Hesperus. His jumpsuit would later appear in the cartoon Eliza on the Ice, to which it would actually be swapped in his cartoon. His characters of Pure Heart and Oil Cat Harry would actually later be in his cartoon A Fight to Finish, and would later in his special entrees in The Witch's Cat.
Here I come to save the day.
By the way, there are actually two Mighty Mouse cartoons that hold some significance. Wolf is the only Mighty Mouse cartoon to be found in the public domain, although that hasn't stopped YouTube from having like hundreds of these things, so yeah. And Gypsy Life is the only Mighty Mouse cartoon to get online for an Academy Award. Afterwards, he would eventually stop making content at age 55. However, he would eventually get a huge name from himself in the cartoon series My Mouse Playhouse. In the early release of 2000 TV, it became a huge hit and actually made 3 more cartoons afterwards to help boost numbers during his time to make it by the name of Outer Space Visitor, Mysterious Package, and Catalog, but in the levels from 78 to 81. Now, Bakshi, she had actually not worked made My Mouse cartoons, but he was very aware of the character nonetheless. And by the time that My Mouse was there, it had been that long since he had been quite a long time. The last time My Mouse had used anything was the New Adventures of My Mouse, Jekyll and Jekyll in 19th by Filmation. It didn't run very long, only ran for 16 episodes, but it did prove to be long enough, and it proved to be very good. And actually, they did a full animation style, running for 2 and ran for its first season, being 13 episodes. But then came the episode The Littlest Tramp. Initially, the career was actually dissuaded when My Mouse was seen to look the way the big flower at the same time. A big movie, of course, flower.
I know someone else like that.
Well, Bakshi, the creators were about it, they seemed to take out context and see if My Mouse could actually be seen doing cocaine. Now, it didn't seem as crazy as possible, but it did seem like it would make more sense, and he thought it would. And it lost it out. But then John K. said that nope, the scene works regardless, and let it end. So when it aired, it went fine and didn't do anything wrong. But until 9 months, on June 6, 1988, Donald Wildman actually said this. It said that he would take it exactly out of context and see if My Mouse would actually take cocaine use. He even tried to use Bakshi's image of girls like Fritz The Cat having chocolate, making him look bad as a quote-unquote pornographer. Despite everything, and despite CBS and Paramount later being on Bakshi's side, it didn't go through. And unfortunately, the show ended in controversy. It would make a second season. The second season would only air for 6 episodes, and the show got cancelled in 1988 afterwards. Only run for 19 episodes. But to this day, My Mouse actually is seeing something to actually work. And while it didn't get over amazingly, it did produce all great animation style. Hell, John K. literally says that all of 1970 can look back on My Mouse. Unfortunately, with that My Mouse controversy, it's like Coonskin all over again. Bakshi couldn't try to get a concept that he made called Junktown and pitched it to Nickelodeon. The only thing that came out of this was his official Christmas in Teartown for his film. After that, he decided he finally worked on other projects afterwards. Was Imagine America for a film called This Ain't Vietnam, which actually did pretty well. So much so that not even a car crash could stop him. Yes, he stands up and everything. Once he got back to work, he then made 2 more projects afterwards. It's about Bad Book and Houndtown, which for the latter, Bakshi described it as an embarrassing piece of shit. But afterwards, he decided to make one final film, one to cap off his career, and that would be a little film called Cool World. It's about an animated Jack Deves who seems to be thinking of an imaginary world called Cool World. The only difference is that this is not an imaginary world, and a cop named Frank. Frank knows this too, also being live action too, and says that the Cool World is a world where cartoons and live action people where the cartoons are called doodles and the humans are called noids. One of these doodles, Hollywood, wants to be annoyed in real life, and wants Jack Deves to screw her. But this is strictly forbidden in Cool World, and Frank knows this. So Frank has to make sure to stop all these selfish tensions and not break down the barrier between our world and Cool World. Initially, now what maybe might you call as a Roger Rabbit clone, and that's from some of the nicer folks. The initial project was actually very, very different. But okay, as Bakshi projects a horror movie about a guy and a cartoon duo called Debbie Dallas. Playing on the program film Debbie Does Dallas, by the way. And the hybrid child would actually grow up resenting his father for abandoning him. and him and mentioned try to go and kill it off. When they got the idea, they love the idea. Yeah, and eventually he would decide he wanted to make the movie down to have it all work out in the same ways. However, while the film was being made, something else happened. One of the producers of the film would be Frank Mancuso Jr., the son of Frank Sr. When he got asked to be parent, almost every single film of his was a horror movie, including his the Final 13 movies. When he saw that another horror movie was being made, he didn't like the idea down when he actually, and asked him to change it afterwards. He didn't want to do another horror movie by the time this happened. So, afterwards, he decided to just cancel them, decided to change the script up in secret. When Bakshi got wind of this new script, he said the entire script was thrown out, along with changing the rating from R to PG-13. After hearing all this, Bakshi did something that many producers and many people probably dreamt of doing. Punching the producer in the face. But, while that happened, there was more issues afterwards with casting. Initially, they wanted to cast Drew Barrymore as Hollywood and Brad Pitt as Jack Deeps. Of course, another fight broke out for two reasons. One, this casting just didn't seem to Ralph, and two, well, I'm not sure if it was in theory, but also Barrymore was a minor, so that also probably doesn't help out mine as either. Instead, they decided to keep Brad Pitt as Frank Harris and have Kim Basinger play as Hollywood, while Gabriel Byrne would play as Jack Deeps. So, as they were trying to help out the roles, even though that was not being made, he still decided to make the whole film work as possible. Instead, and decided to make the film by trying to work with animation cells. However, during this time, no new animators were given the script. They were just told to animate whatever the hell they wanted to make sure the script would pay off. I do wonder if other films have this similar issue, because I don't know about you, but pointless animated scenes seem to be a running trend these days. I guess Cool World is more popular than I thought. Oh, and by the way, another thing that's unique is that while the studios actually do own the characters, there is one character that might have come up with. Some people have noticed that Nails and Sinius has a lot of similarities to our characters Sinius Spider and Christmas Teta, with both having a similar design and both being voiced by Charlie Adler.
Oh, that was great, just great. I've been trying to take over Pat It Down for years, but never like that.
Did I ever tell you about the time I took up with the most delightfully stacked hussy from the project?
Yeah.
Right. We're two boys.
By the time the film was ready to finish production, there was another controversy, although this time it wasn't Rob's problem for once. A big catch was to see the film, and of course, one of those was Holly's whole sex appeal, to which they literally started hating her at the Hollywood sign. The people, it actually offended people in Los Angeles who did that. However, that would be far from the worst problems, as Cool World, when it was in July 10, 1992, was a complete and utter bomb. Critics may have praised the animation, but the according to the story, not only was it broken, but it also just didn't work. And the animation between live action and animation felt more amateurish. As for my view, I'm not gonna hide it. Cool World just is not a good movie for some people. Okay? Well, the animation is fine at times. It also is just way too distracting at the same time. I feel like there are times where the animation stops and they just have random animated bits fly around. And that commits a very carnal sin in me. And that is making the animation too distracting. See, it's like trying to present with lack of story, which the story is a complete mess. This whole I would love to see the original idea. Would have been good? I don't know, honestly. But the original concept was at least 4 years old. Okay, and honestly, this film just decides to jump around when it feels like it, having no real story structure that really works. It's not exactly the worst movie I've ever seen, but unfortunately, it just doesn't work as a movie, and I think that's the main issue. The acting's pretty good, but it doesn't work. As for how it did the box office, it was a bomb heavily, only making $14 million off its $28 million budget. On the bright side, if I was one thing that does work with film even without everything else, the soundtrack is actually pretty good, which is directed by The Cult, Ministry, and David Bowie. I spent my time this more like raunchy Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and unfortunately lost out for not being cool. Afterwards, Bakshi decided to find a step back from animation afterwards again. While Cool World did eventually try again, he decided to just take a break. A year afterwards, Bakshi did what many times he did before and sent a script to If I Caught You, I'll Kill Her. And this time, it actually worked. Where he made the sci-fi and it really premiered as the film Cool and the Crazy, starring two recurring actors at the time, Jared Leto and Alicia Silverstone. Not long after that, he got hired by Fred Seaburn and Humphrey to make two cartoons called Malcolm and Malcolm, about a cockroach named Malcolm and a clown named Melvin. Both be made in 1997 afterwards. He was then pitched to work on a cartoon called HBO called Spicy City afterwards. Well, the crew were more mixed on Tales of Raven afterwards. It did seem to get some decent reviews and was eventually successful. However, when they wanted to pitch a second season, they also wanted to fire the entire writing crew, including Ralph, which unfortunately Ralph said no, and it only went for 6 episodes. Afterwards, Bakshi finally retired from the animation spectrum. Even afterwards, Bakshi just wanted to stay back and just wanted more, which is why he became a painter and moved to New Mexico. But even then, he would eventually try to make animated films. He did try his own series, Bakshi Blues, a series called Trickle Dickle Down, using re-examination of Coonskin, but ended up being the only Bakshi Blues cartoon. And so there is that. But he also lived on his own project called The Last Day of Coney Island. And it eventually would be released in 2015, they sort of kickstarted that with money. But it didn't help made, and which didn't do well enough, and it eventually would be on YouTube afterwards. But these days, Ralph has been settling down and has been mostly showing off his animation to other people. And there's a reason why. Exactly. Ralph Bakshi is a dude, and while his career does end up kind of sadly, Bakshi has admitted that he's happy where his career has gone and up, and so that his impact will never rest. And honestly, I can't help but agree. Ralph Bakshi is the person who gave animation in this video a new appeal in a way that was just unique. And people are fans of his work. Look, this includes, and not just like this, but also famous directors like Martin Scorsese and Quentin Tarantino are actually been fans of his work. Look, in fact, one of the things that Ralph Bakshi is a huge name, and he did try to get adult animation to work out in the way that's supposed to. And even though it didn't work out in the end for everybody, it is the reason why adult animation does have a platform to this day, and that's really because of Ralph. And anything else, well, it did inspire a lot of things, and that's why Ralph is always intense. Going from films that are more independent to try. But he did make things independent, and although he didn't all succeed, every film that he made was wholly his own, and that's what he's there. Before we end, and that's what I always mind about Ralph Bakshi. Before we end off this episode, I'd like to thank a few sources helped. Firstly, of course, there is the book, Unfiltered, the complete Ralph Bakshi. I cannot show this full book pages on YouTube because it is pretty explicit, but it was a big help in researching this whole thing. Heck, the answers actually written by Tarantino himself, so it helps a lot. And I also want to thank Let's Jump by the Bible and once again for his animation back series on Ralph Bakshi. He was a big help in the big production, and I have his videos on below. Thank you all for watching. If you like any more podcasts and watching more, you can watch on Spotify, Amazon, Apple, wherever you watch podcasts. Please, one comment, making the podcast for thinking of month. Please come follow me. Let's how we update these things. Please come follow me too. We need to upload it. Until next time, take care, and I'll see you all later.